In the last few years, we've lived through the largest pharmaceutical warfare operation that humanity has ever seen. This was carried out at the highest levels of government, not just in the US government, but across the world. But specifically in the US government, Operation Warp Speed was a military informational warfare operation against the American public to control what information was being proliferated on social media. This wasn't about factual information, it was about an informational agenda. Healthcare practitioners and the American public weren't having full access online to the information about a certain pharmaceutical injection, the kind of reactions people were getting, the scientific research behind that injection. It's really sobering to take a look at the big picture here and the repercussions we're dealing with. We're dealing with, of course, injury and death from this pharmaceutical bioweapon. We're also dealing with people who lost jobs, lost career paths or academic paths, was estranged from family members due to not getting this injection, and all the discrimination and fear that was happening, and this division between vaxxers and anti-vaxxers. So what I want to discuss today is, how do we move forward from this? How do we face the reality of this situation, which is sobering? And how do we move forward in the healthiest way so that we can heal? Because we are able to heal. That's the thing. My life is a testament to we can heal from what the world will tell us is impossible to heal. How do we heal as individuals, but also how do we heal as a global community so that this cycle, this pattern, doesn't happen again? I hear a lot of people, especially in the online world I'm a part of, suggesting that the solution here is to pursue justice, especially through certain legal means. I hear people calling for a second Nuremberg trial of sorts, and to create repercussions for the crimes against humanity that were perpetuated. And yes, indeed, these were huge crimes against humanity. However, I want to raise some questions today. Like, is it possible to pursue justice here? And who are the perpetrators of injustice? Because this is a crime of brainwashing. And so the people who did the most harm were actually the most brainwashed, and therefore, potentially, the biggest victims. That can be triggering for some of you to hear, and I will explain this in a bit. Another reality that we have to look at here is, did the justice system work in the first place if we've just had this huge pharmaceutical warfare situation? If the Nuremberg Code worked, for example, we wouldn't be here, okay? The Nuremberg Code was created to prevent this kind of mass medical experimentation and mass medical genocide. But we just went through that, so it didn't work. Like, that's the cold, hard fact of the situation. And if the US legal codes that were in place to prevent this situation worked, we wouldn't be here. Specifically, US Legal Code 360 BBB-3-C, which I was rattling off to so many stores that were discriminating against me in the last few years. And that was to prevent the forcible use of an emergency use authorized drug, and yet that happened, so that legal code didn't work. If the Hippocratic Oath worked, we wouldn't be here. If the Hippocratic Oath worked, doctors would not be giving these pharmaceutical injections, not just for COVID, but across the board. Doctors would not be using these pharmaceutical injections. And I will say the upside is a lot of people are waking up to that fact right now. And if, laws around anti-discrimination for people's disabilities or health status worked, we wouldn't be here. The definition of insanity that I've heard before is trying the same thing and expecting a different result. So let's just look at the fact that none of that worked. All of that was in place to prevent what just happened. And we just went through all that happening. So how do we move forward? How do we actually break this cycle and maybe try a different approach that will actually work? As I touched on before, what we're dealing with here in these crimes against humanity is a crime of brainwashing and mind control. This is a propaganda warfare. And when it comes to mind control, another term we could use here is grooming. There's a couple definitions for grooming. The operative definition I'm using is not the positive definition, like you can groom somebody for a job or a career, but grooming as defined by recruiting an individual's participation in their own abuse and exploitation. And that's what we have witnessed on a widespread level in the last few years. People were groomed into being foot soldiers in this pharmaceutical warfare operation, in this informational warfare operation. And when someone is groomed, they aren't the enemy, they are the victim. That's the definition of grooming and brainwashing. No one is willingly consenting to have their mind hijacked by an individual or by a system that is going to make that individual act against their own best interest. The nature of grooming and brainwashing is to make the victim act in the best interest of an abuser or an abusive industry, so that the individual is actually acting against their deepest values, their health, their best interest. That's what grooming is. When you groom a person, you can make them sabotage what is most important to them. You can make them act against their intuition. You can make them hurt their family members or estrange themselves from their family and their community. We see this dynamic happening in cults and in fundamentalist religions and in corporate environments as well. So this level of grooming was the primary way these crimes against humanity were perpetuated, and perpetuated on such a broad scale. Grooming and brainwashing are more effective than physical force when it comes to controlling a person, because you can hold a gun to a person's head or you can physically force them to do something, and that person is going to know that they're being forced against their will. So you can change a person's behavior by holding a gun to their head and making them behave in a certain way under threat of taking their life. But that victim is going to know, I'm dealing with a bad person here, right? That victim might try to escape. That victim is not going to go rush to the abuser who's holding a gun to their head for safety in the future, okay? The thing with brainwashing, mind control, hypnosis, grooming, whatever you want to call it, is that it not only changes a person's behavior, just like physical force does, but it's capable of changing their deepest values and thoughts. So when you change a person's thoughts, you can get them to actually see the real enemy, right? The abusive person, the brainwasher, as their friend or their mentor or somebody who has their best interest at heart, right? In this case, a lot of people saw the pharmaceutical industry as a force that actually had their best interest at heart. Now, if we look at this rationally, that's not true. The pharmaceutical industry is, just look at the track record and look at the data on any of their products. That's just not true. They don't have the best interest of human health at heart. So why were so many people thinking this? Because when you're brainwashed, you're not in your right mind, okay? The real simple way, the simple litmus test to see if somebody is under the influence of grooming is to ask yourself, would someone in their right mind make this choice? No, No, not when it comes to getting a pharmaceutical injection that doesn't work and does more harm than good. That just goes to show how deep the brainwashing went here. And let's not just point fingers for people who succumbed to brainwashing by the pharmaceutical industry and governmental warfare. I mean, look, this is not about smart people versus stupid people, because grooming and brainwashing works on the smartest people. Okay? So this was a hard wake up in my life, and I'm going to share a little more about this later in the video. But I was a victim of very extreme mind control by a psychopathic abuser. And I was a very intelligent person, right? So I had this very humbling experience of thinking, oh, intelligence does not protect a person from being brainwashed. It doesn't. So I'm not making statements that you're a bad person or you're a stupid person if you succumb to certain brainwashing or cult dynamics anywhere in your life. Because the reality is, if you're human, you're vulnerable to that. And the reality is, if you're human, you're being influenced by some of that in certain areas of your life. And if you're listening to this video and you're like, no, I'm the exception, I'm so resilient to being mind controlled that I really am totally in my right mind all of the time, in charge of my own decisions, well, that's a sign that you are probably very brainwashed to think that. It's not just in the pharmaceutical arena or arenas of governmental warfare and propaganda that people are susceptible to brainwashing. This actually happens on all levels of society. Okay, so this is not just a matter also of people being in, religious cults or fundamentalist groups or self-help cults. No, I mean, we can look at the beauty industry, for example, which is something I've written and talked about at great length. It's the topic of one of my books, The Invisible Corset, and I discuss how plastic surgery is a big manifestation of how groomed women are to participate in their own abuse of their bodies. Plastic surgery is not in a woman's best interest. It's not in our best interest to mutilate the natural integrity of our body and erase our ethnic variety. It's in the best interest of the plastic surgery industry, right? It's in the best interest of making money for these industries, not actually empowering ourselves. Here's another dynamic to consider. When a person is brainwashed, they're going to vehemently defend their own participation in their abuse. And they're going to call it empowerment. They're going to call it a route to enlightenment or to fulfillment or to confidence, right? We see this certainly in the beauty industry a lot, where women are like, oh, I'm freezing my facial muscles through a neurotoxin called Botox because it's empowering to me, right? They are defending their self-abuse because that's the nature of brainwashing. Again, look, if you're somebody who participates in that, I'm not saying you're bad or stupid, but I am saying maybe look at that as a blind spot. It's human nature to fall into these traps where we defend our self-abuse as a form of empowerment. You'll see this in any abusive relationship. I was there. I was abused out of my mind in a relationship with a psychopath, and I was his biggest defender, right? That's a sign that somebody is so mind controlled that they're actually saying, no, I'm acting out of love or I'm acting out of empowerment, while defending somebody or defending an industry that is actively hurting them and or their family members. Circling back to the pharmaceutical warfare we experienced, this raises the question, where do we draw the line between someone acting from brainwashing and their self-responsibility in their actions? That's a really big question, and I don't know where to draw the line. I don't. I think it's something every individual has to look at because it is nuanced. And if somebody says this is a black and white issue, I don't think they're thinking very deeply about this. I also don't think somebody who can see this as a black and white issue is actually reflecting on all the ways that brainwashing and grooming might be impacting their daily decisions. This is something we all have growth room around. The other aspect here is that facts don't fix brainwashing. I've talked about this before, but it's the very nature of brainwashing to reject the information that is going to set the individual free. I mean, the people and the industries that are doing the brainwashing, they're not stupid. And look, we're dealing with military intelligence, propaganda, informational warfare here, okay? Like, there is a big history of learning how best to brainwash a person so they are trapped in that brainwashing forever. Like, look up MK Ultra, for example, right? This is not a novel approach here. This is a highly, highly attuned warfare strategy that has impacted most of the world. And facts aren't going to fix the problem, okay? The thing that breaks through brainwashing really is an internal change in the individual. It has to start from within. And there are things that people can do to plant seeds or just live a liberated life. Like when I was coming out of the brainwashing of the beauty industry, I was somebody who used to participate in a lot of self-abuse around that. I was anorexic when I was 11 years old because I was so mind controlled by this industry. And I'm really grateful to some of the women I saw in my life or in my world who just exhibited the courage to live in alignment with their bodies and not butcher and harm their own bodies. They planted seeds for me so that when I was willing and ready to free myself, I had some shining examples, okay? So that's how we break through brainwashing. It's actually done by love and with courage, but we can't take somebody out of their brainwashing. It's an inside job. Compassion is the other major ingredient that will help the world recover from this massive brainwashing. So I mentioned I was in a very abusive relationship, and a lot of people could see that. It was obvious to them and not to me. And when I was finally had, the wake up and the courage to get out of this situation, and it was a dangerous situation, it took a lot of courage, I got free, and I did not have people telling me, I told you so. I mean, it was humbling and hard enough for me to get out of this situation, and my friends knew that. So instead, they just said, oh, Lauren, we're so glad you're safe. We love you so much. We understand, why you made that choice, even if maybe they didn't, but it was helpful for me to feel understood. And I felt loved. They didn't need to pat their own egos on the back and get an I told you so out of the situation. Love and compassion really are going to help the people who are still stuck in the brainwashing. And there are a lot of people now who are waking up to this pharmaceutical warfare, and it's an uncomfortable wake up. And so the last thing we want to do is say, I told you so. I mean, if you're one of those people who feels embittered and victimized and resentful because of what happened to you in the last few years for not getting an injection, and you want to go tell people I told you so, go to your room, deal with your ego problem alone, because you are not helping anybody, okay? So the thing here is compassion. And if you're having trouble getting to that point, because maybe you were somebody who lost a lot and went through a lot of difficulty for not getting the injection, I know what you're talking about. I was there too. Consider this. Who would you rather be? Would you rather be somebody who was estranged from family and lost your reputation and was called bad names in the grocery store and screamed at because you weren't wearing a face muzzle and Maybe you lost your job. I lost my literary agent, my old publishing house, a lot of things that I was counting on in my career as a writer because of my integrity and honesty. Okay, that wasn't easy, right? That was hard. Or would you rather be the person who was so brainwashed that you actually injected this poison into people's arms, or you gave this poison to your children, or you coerced your loved ones into getting this poisonous injection because you truly believed that was in your best interest and their best interest? Who would you rather be? I would rather be the person who got the brunt of being vilified and misunderstood than if I was the person who actually participated in distributing this bioweapon. And if you are somebody who was in the trenches in the healthcare situation and you were giving people this injection, or you've given other pharmaceutical injections before, and you're going through a wake up, that's a lot of humble pie to eat, and my heart goes out to you. That's not easy. And the key here is not to have self-blame, to look at self-responsibility and the vulnerability we had, and I'm going to get into that in a little more depth when it comes to brainwashing. But this is not a time or a place for shame or self-blame, because those are two psychological ingredients that aren't going to help anyone, okay? They're not going to help you heal. They're not going to help the world heal. Here's another piece of this brainwashing puzzle and another piece of humble pie to eat, which is that the vaxxers were brainwashed to see the anti-vaxxers as the enemy, and the anti-vaxxers were brainwashed to see the vaxxers as the enemy. Look, if you were one of those people who thought that these individuals who are shooting themselves up with the pharmaceutical injection were the enemy, you were blinded. You weren't seeing the bigger picture. These folks weren't the enemy. They were the victims of massive brainwashing, right? And this is the thing about any us versus them dichotomy. Whatever we're seeing in this group over here is actually a mirror of something that is within us, okay? So there were these two groups, vaxxers and anti-vaxxers, that were just mirroring an equal level of fear, and each group ironically thought that their fear was very justified. That's the nature of fear. But each group was also really blaming and othering the other group as the enemy. But it wasn't a matter of us versus them. It was a matter of brainwashing at the highest levels to pit people against each other, okay? It wasn't, and it still isn't, a matter of us versus them. This is a matter of we all have to wake up together. We all have to realize that the group we were blaming was in some way a victim of mind control, and that similarly ourselves, we were a victim of mind control as well. So this is the bigger picture that we all have to free ourselves from. And I'm going to talk about how we can do that. I want to illustrate with a little bit of my personal story. And this is a story that I share in my new book, The Scorpion and the Lion. This book is part whistleblower expose and part spiritual memoir. It's about my journey discovering and then publicizing, much to the chagrin of my community members, the systemic abuse cover-up at my nutrition school. And it actually led all the way to the founder of the school. And so this was an experience where I saw how thousands of good, normal people, myself included, became unwitting foot soldiers for a couple of evil people. What I realized from this experience is that we don't need more good people to solve the problem of dark agendas and systemic abuse. That's not going to fix the problem. The irony is that everybody thinks of themselves as a good person while they're actually fulfilling an agenda for a psychopath, okay? This was the case if we look back through any situation of tyranny in the world. all of the individuals who support the tyrant, they tended to think of themselves as good people. What I learned from this experience is that we don't need more good people or more nice people to solve this problem of tyranny, to solve this problem of dark agendas being carried out by so many unwitting people. We need more people who are resilient to manipulation. And that is a very different thing, a very different life skill than simply seeing yourself as a good person. I'm going to explain that. I want to read an excerpt from this book to illustrate my point. There was a time I believed, like so many victims of abuse, that I was manipulated because I was so generous, trusting, and loving. The truth was, I was manipulated not because I was so loving, but because I lacked a deeper understanding and embodiment of love. My lack of personal boundaries, my raging insecurities, and my naivete to the existence of psychopaths made me highly vulnerable. What is manipulation? I believe it is being used by someone else's fear, trauma, greed, or ego. Being used in such a way, you actually become an instrument for perpetuating fear, trauma, greed, and ego in the world. In other words, if you've been manipulated, you've been used by the darkness for the darkness. How can the love within you be used for such a purpose? It simply can't be. Love bends to no manipulation and answers only to the will of the Creator. Only the existing darkness within you, those seeds of fear, trauma, greed, and ego, can be manipulated. So the solution here on a community level and a global level is not becoming a nicer person, it's becoming a more courageous person. Somebody who makes choices informed by courage rather than fear. Because if any of our choices are informed by fear, that's actually a sign we're being manipulated on some level. I mean, just look at how much of consumer culture is driven by fear-based buying, by this idea that you're not enough, you're not good enough, you're not worthy enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not whatever enough, unless you have these things, you have this lifestyle. So that is just being manipulated by industries, right? By materialism. And that's just one example. The people who are most resilient to manipulation are those people who have done a really deep dive into their own psyche and their own motivation in life. And they have the independence to really not care what other people think of them or how they're judged. These are people who don't need validation. Validation is an egoic need, okay? It's not something that feeds the soul. And so these people can live in a way that is very aligned with their soul because they have courage. And so the real awakening here, the real solution to breaking this cycle of tyranny and medical genocide and pharmaceutical warfare, the real solution is not a political savior. It's not somebody out there who's going to save you. It is a rising of human consciousness in the form of humanity acting from more courage and making less decisions from fear. Every choice that you make every day, even if it's a little thing or something you might consider little, where you decide you're going to choose out of courage rather than making a fear-based choice, you are changing the world. You're changing human consciousness in your own way. You're impacting people who you'll never meet because you're actually changing your vibrational state. You're changing your cellular state. Courage is a product of love, and courage begets more love around you and more love in your life. A common misconception is that we need some fear in our thinking to make rational decisions. This is simply not true. We need wisdom and we need discernment, but those are also products of love. They're not products of fear. And so my challenge to you is just to go through your day and consider the choices that you're making. What are you wearing? What are you eating? What are you buying? What are you saying to people? What are you putting online? Whatever it may be. Are your choices coming from fear or from courage? And when we can start to practice that every single day, then we're able to make these bigger life-changing choices that are very courageous. This is the journey we have to take to become manipulation proof. As you can see, it's a very different thing entirely than being a good person or a nice person. Here's a story to illustrate this example from the life of Jesus. So this is told in the book of Matthew, and Jesus was in the super vulnerable state because he had been fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, and the embodiment of the highest form of evil came to him and said, "Hey, Jesus, I can give you fame and power and wealth and comfort." You know, all of the things that the darkness says to us in our own personal life to make us act out of fear. Same playbook, right? And Jesus is like, yeah, no, I don't want any of that. I'm not going to compromise my soul. I'm not going to make any choices out of fear. So Jesus was the most loving person to walk the face of planet Earth. He was the embodiment of pure divine love, and he came to show humanity how to be that. All this you can do and more, he said. And as his life shows us, he was totally manipulation proof because he was such pure love. There was nowhere that temptation or darkness could hook in and manipulate him. I don't think the psychopaths at the helm of dark agendas are enemies. And I know that can sound shocking, especially to those of you who know the depth of evil that we're talking about here. I do. I understand that it might be arguable that some of these people are even people, and you might want to look up reptilians and then ask why the same fact-checking notifications are on information about reptilians as they were about COVID truth information that was being published years ago. And the reason that, from my perception, they're not our enemies is because they actually play an integral role in the awakening of humanity. And here's how that works. It's human nature not to know how much we can be manipulated until we are manipulated. So all of those seeds that I talked about, those seeds of fear and trauma and greed and ego that are all hidden in us, they're hidden in what Carl Jung calls the shadow, in our unconscious. Like, we don't realize they're there and they're unhealed and they're actually informing our decisions. We don't realize that often until a manipulative person or force or industry comes into our life and uses hooks into those seeds and can just like pull strings to make us behave certain ways. We don't know how much we can be manipulated until we are manipulated. And that's a big wake up. And it's a very empowering experience because then it gives us the opportunity to root out those seeds, to cut off those strings of manipulation and become resilient to manipulation, to bring love into all those places of hidden darkness. For that reason, I truly believe psychopaths are playing a spiritual role in waking up humanity. Now let's revisit the question that I asked at the beginning of this video, which is, how does humanity move forward after COVID crimes? How do we break this cycle so it doesn't happen again? Because pharmaceutical genocide, pharmaceutical warfare, we have been through this before, just not at this level. For example, the AIDS crisis was the same playbook as the COVID crisis, but COVID just really amped up the same playbook of manipulation. So it's time that we just break this cycle once and for all. How do we do that? And I explained why I don't believe a justice approach through legal avenues is the most effective. I could agree that there's a time and a place for that, but like I said, if the US legal code worked, we wouldn't be here. If the Nuremberg Code worked, we wouldn't be here. If the Hippocratic Oath worked, we wouldn't be here. So how do we try a new strategy in order to get a different result? Justice is a strategy to right past wrongs, right? If somebody was robbed, if somebody was hurt, we want to get justice to make amends for that situation. But the reality is, through justice, you don't actually right the wrong. You don't go back in time and erase reality, especially if somebody was killed, for example, as many people were killed from the bioweapon we're talking about here. You can't create justice for that. However, I do believe it is possible to right wrongs, but it takes a very different approach and a very different perspective called healing. Okay, I am advocating for an approach of healing versus justice. My definition of healing is achieving a level of consciousness where the harms that were experienced on the previous level of consciousness are released. Let me say that again. Healing is achieving a level of consciousness or awareness where the harms that were experienced in the past are now released. Released meaning they are integrated, they are transcended, could be a good word for that. Let's use an example of physical healing to illustrate this concept. When I was 18, I was bedridden with an incurable disease, and my doctors had all told me that I would be dealing with this disease for the rest of my life, that I would require medications and probably intense surgery in my future. And I was experiencing a lot of harm to my physical body while I operated from that level of thinking. When I bought into that reality, a lot of harm came to my body. And then I decided to reach a different level of consciousness, to open my mind to new perceptions. And I started to see all these possibilities to heal myself that my doctors had totally no awareness of. So I did heal myself using nutrition and holistic modalities. And now here I am, and all of those harms that my body had experienced through illness and through pharmaceutical poisoning and those side effects of those medications, it's released. Okay, that's what healing is. It actually does right the wrong that happened in the past. And this is the approach that I am advocating for around COVID crimes. We have to get to a level of consciousness where we see what has happened is actually integral to an awakening of humanity so that we can experience a world of more love and unification and less division. We needed this experience to wake ourselves up to the level of brainwashing that we've been experiencing. And I understand, and my heart goes out to those of you who are watching this video and you have lost loved ones to pharmaceutical poisoning. I feel that in my heart, and I can understand why you might be thinking, well, that all sounds great, Lauren, but that's not going to bring my loved one back to earth. And truly, my heart goes out to you. And healing means achieving a level of consciousness where the harms are released. So there's a level of consciousness that a lot of humans are attached to, which is this earth is it. That this is where love starts and where love ends. And if we lose somebody on earth, we lose them forever. And that's simply not true, because to the soul, whatever body you're in right now is essentially like one outfit of clothing that will then be discarded and the soul continues. That's the bigger picture. Healing often requires that we get to a deeper level of spiritual awareness of the nature of reality. This was a big piece in my own healing. I know grief. I know loss. of loved ones. And I had to get to this level of awareness that love continues. It's only the illusion of this earth that we think love stops when someone leaves their body. Okay? So that's another example of what I mean by healing. I mean, we are being called to big healing, but do you understand why this is so important to humanity? Like, if we can step up to the plate, this is really going to transform our experience of Earth and our experience on Earth. I believe the only effective strategy we have going forward to truly break this cycle is to heal. That's the way we right the wrongs. And to get to a level of consciousness where it's not us versus them, and it's not even us versus the psychopaths, because everyone and everything on earth is offering us a lesson in love, and it's only up to us to open our eyes and our heart enough to see that. This is my prayer for humanity, that we open our own eyes. You know, the only eyes you can open are your own. And you open them more and more and more, and then you see more love and more love and more love. And yes, as you open them more, you also start to see the depths of darkness. But the amazing thing and the ultimate truth is that the love is always more powerful. I want to leave you with the knowledge that it is possible to turn any dark event into a love story. And that really is the theme of my book, The Scorpion and the Lion. The subtitle is A Love Story, because I experienced very intense abuse and trauma at the hands of a psychopath. He was literally a dark wizard. And I decided that I was going to come out of those horrific experiences not only healed, but with my heart wide open. And I did. I learned how to turn some really terrible events that happened to me into plot twists in the love story of my life. And what we're going through right now, I promise you, is a plot twist in the magnificent love story of humanity on planet Earth. How do I know this? I know this in my soul. I know this because my soul came down to experience this tremendous transformation of consciousness on human Earth, on planet Earth right now. And this is not where the story ends. This is where the story begins. This is where the triumph of love and truth is going to be so astounding. Our jaws are all going to drop. I know that in my soul. And so I invite you to be part of rewriting this story so that we turn the story of the world, we turn the story of the last few years into a love story. And I know we can do that. Thank you for watching.